Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking video podcast discussion. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and their implications for the world at large. We are your hosts. I am Corey Pheez Lee, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I'm Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
I can't help but report the weather. It's 58 degrees, and it is getting nicer, albeit it's a bit rainy and drizzly outside.
Yesterday, I don't know. The other day, Corey, it was 70, and then at night it was 30, and it's that point where it just doesn't make up its mind. But hopefully we're getting there.
Well, welcome to New England.
What's with your snow cap also?
Oh, yeah. I'm always cold. You know what I mean? It's like I'm like freezing right now, so I need to turn on the heat. But that'll be something. But we're recording this on Thursday, the 3rd of April, 2025. And in a little bit, we'll be discussing education, universal access to the future.
Absolutely. And as a reminder, Super Adaptables is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, I should note that the views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers.
Indeed. Education is super important, and it goes hand in hand with advocacy. Advocacy is educating the public on a particular issue to garner support and bring attention to something that affects the world at large, especially if there's misinformation attached to it. So Joshua Basil, who's an individual that we've spoken with in the previous podcast, he immediately comes to mind. And we really value his insight and what he brings to the table in terms of advocacy. We had the privilege of speaking with him during our introduction into social safety nets and why preserving them is key to longevity and quality of life. And though he suffered a spinal cord injury at the age of 18 and being paralyzed from the shoulders down, he didn't let that affect him from going to college and going to law school and working as a trial attorney and running his foundation Determined to Heal, also known as Spinopedia, with which More Than Walking has been partnering with for the past few years.
Exactly, and Spinopedia is great. We're helping newly injured families, newly injured individuals navigate the whole system of social safety nets from day one in the hospital till the day they get a job, or beyond, getting involved and connected to the community, and really navigating all the different resources that are available to them in and outside the hospital. The collaboration is going to be moving forward, especially with our video course that's going to be coming out in the next couple of years on bed mobility and transfers. So if you're interested in navigating these benefit programs or learning independent skills post-injury, check out Spinalpedia. There's a lot there to access. So as I reflect on our motto, sharing the path to independence after spinal cord injury, people like Josh are a testament to that hard work and access to education that can lead one to employment opportunities and open doorways for yourself and to help advocate for others. This is an example that should be possible for all of us to experience. Once you are a student and then you become the teacher, showing people that independence is possible, regardless of your disability. And I think it's worth noting, apart from disability, many of the people we look up to, especially our elected officials, perhaps, prioritized education has not only advanced their careers, but it's given them the ability to legislate and fight for educational rights so that others can have the same opportunities that were afforded to them. Related to that is, in recent days, we've been hearing a lot about students on college campuses who have taken these opportunities, having come from outside the United States. They are, whether they're permanent residents or they're on a student visa, and they have voiced their concerns and their opinions in public forums and in college newspapers, and simply because those views have not aligned with the current administration, they have been silenced and deported or harassed or imprisoned without any criminal offense being any charges, any criminal charges brought, or being found guilty of anything. And this is really concerning because what is education? What is free speech if we don't all have access to that? If we don't all have a guarantee that we can learn and we can express our point of view in a safe and respectful manner without being fear of being imprisoned. And if, from the disabled community point of view, we would never have access to education and the different programs that we're going to be talking about without peaceful protest. We had to sit in government buildings and protest, and some of us got arrested, and we have had to fight tooth and nail in order to get access to education. And so when we see fellow students, fellow residents, fellow permanent residents, anyone in this country who is silenced or torn from that educational environment or from those opportunities to study and learn simply because of they have a disagreement on policy positions, that should be concerning to all of us.
Indeed. It makes me think about how during most of the 20th century, children with disabilities, they frequently face discrimination in public education, and either through lack of appropriate accommodations or complete exclusion from local schools. And it took advocates to stand in those gaps to be able to say, okay, enough is enough, like going from the civil rights era where those protests were, peaceful, sitting, shut-ins, boycotting, public transportation in order to make some type of noise, and following thereafter, disability advocates tapped in to those same methods to draw attention to, if we are this country that says free speech, and we're a country that says that, citizens have right to be treated fairly and equally, well, that means everybody. And we need to kind of re-examine the things that we've done in the past to help push forward in the future. And so, students who come to this country and looking for opportunity to better themselves and even better, give perspectives that are, maybe different, doesn't necessarily mean that they don't align with American values, but maybe, we need to look at things from a more global scale. And that's why it's important with all of the different types of advancements in the laws and whatnot, which, we're about to get into, that has helped give us access to education.
And I've also heard some people say, well, these aren't citizens. These aren't citizens these students who are being thrown out of universities and deported and harassed. Some of them are married to citizens. And also this starts with people who have fewer rights, and it eventually leads to everyone else. It starts with the most vulnerable populations and then starts going more mainstream. And we can't take our rights for granted when we see those same rights being stripped away from others. Just because I'm not a permanent resident, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't care what happens to my fellow students or my fellow residents who are. And we'll kind of get into some examples of how that's already happening. So I want to note some educational opportunities for students with special needs that come in different forms. So for example, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability in employment, state and local government, public accommodations, commercial facilities, transportation, and telecommunications. Some examples are accessible transportation for students in wheelchairs, among others. So this is like a really broad law that covers discrimination in all sorts of environments.
Yeah, and you know, those accommodations are like super important. Even going into things like accessible bathrooms, right? Like,
Yep.
children who are in attendance in school, they need to be able to have additional room to be able to transfer from the wheelchair to the commode and what have you. And without having those things in place, how are they going to be able to, go to have a consistent presence in the classroom if they have to like leave or anything if these things were passed? But also FAPE, the free appropriate public education. FAPE is another civil right rooted in the 14th Amendment, which requires schools to provide students with disabilities special education and related services at public expense designed to prepare those students for the future. And so, what comes to mind, I think about is like speech therapy, counseling within schools, social work, things of that nature are definitely helpful for students who need that.
And that's the FAPE, the FAPE.
Yep.
Sounds like a good thing. Um, and then there's the 504 plan. So 504 plans are based on Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which was passed before the ADA. And it provides accommodations and services to ensure equal access to education for students with disabilities in a general education setting. Some accommodations include additional time during tests or being removed from class to test separately from the general class setting. This is something I definitely took advantage of when I was in high school, not because of I was not yet in a wheelchair, but I had challenges focusing with my eyes. I would skip lines when I was reading, and I was really slow in typing. And I would also get anxiety, and the 504 plan, I believe, helped me help get me access to those accommodations. So Section 504 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act both prohibit discrimination at school against kids with disabilities, which can include kids with learning and thinking differences. And when kids are bullied because they have a disability, the school must act. So it's a really, really great program. And the 504 is Section 504 is currently being challenged by 17 different states. We can get into that in a little bit, but that's one of the specific programs that is at risk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we also have IEPs or individualized education programs. And IEP outlines the special education experiences for all eligible students with a disability. And an eligible student is any child in the U.S. between the ages of 3 and 21 attending a public school and has been evaluated as having a need in the form of a specific learning disability. These learning disabilities cover everything from autism, emotional disturbances, other health impairments, intellectual disabilities, orthopedic impairments, multiple disabilities, hearing impairments, just to name a few. And some related accommodations within an IEP may include accessible transportation for students in wheelchairs, as we talked before. And if a student needs specialized transportation, the IEP must specify details like support, specialized equipment, and vehicle requirements, i.e., like a bus monitor, car seat, small van. I'm personally an advocate of bus monitors on all buses because, students get rowdy after school and, the bus driver has to focus their attention on the road. And if there's a kid on that bus who happens to have maybe autism, which, if you're higher on the spectrum, it may seem like it's invisible, but that child may have some sensory issues, and the bus driver can't pay attention to that, but a bus monitor can, and can actually help that student while they're traveling to and fro from either home to school, back to home. So I think that should just be across the board because they're in need of that. But you know, in addition to the programs that are available to children in public schools, there's also programs that are specific for military personnel who have children with disabilities. And there's a website which is called military1.com. It's an official DoD webpage with tons of resources for active duty military personnel. And it reminds me a lot, John, of the exclusiveness of being part of the armed forces, which we discussed when we spoke about veterans benefits back in February. So it's like that's part of one of those uh,
Earned rights.
earned rights that we talk about. Um, and I think because those uniques are a bit different when you're traveling and you're stationed in one place versus the next. So maybe that's probably like the gist of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, so the ADA, the FAPE, the 504, the IEP, these are some examples um, of laws and policies that have been in place for a while now to really support people with disabilities. But as we can see, like emotional disturbance, anxiety, like we can all easily fall into this category. Many students fall into these categories, not just people with uh, outright disabilities. And I think the Section 504 is a good example to kind of dive into a little bit because right now 17 states, um, don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but they are suing to eliminate Section 504 completely, which would eliminate one of these core protections, legal protections for disability accommodations in the school environment. And the reason is because during the Biden administration, uh, gender dysphoria was added to the list of conditions that required schools to make necessary accommodations for students. And many conservative states had a problem with this, and so they are trying to strip the disability protection entirely off the books and rule it unconstitutional. And just want to give some examples of what 504 would do with people with gender dysphoria. And to be clear, gender dysphoria is independent of someone who considers themselves transgender um, or otherwise a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Gender dysphoria refers to the discomfort and distress that results from an incongruence between one's sex assigned at birth and one's gender identity, which some but not all transgender people experience. And what that how that manifests itself is extreme anxiety, um, suicidal ideation. Like a lot of all the pressures that we can think of that you might experience at school, bullying, feeling self-conscious, that on top of discomfort of how you're feeling about your own body. We there have been broad public conversations about eating disorders and how looking at others and looking at yourself and how that can cause a lot of distress and discomfort. The 504 section for gender dysphoria provides about the same type of things: affirming environments, extra time to talk with a counselor during the school day, uh, you know, facilitating students' ability to found or start affirming group like the Gay Straight Alliance or the Gender Sexuality Alliance, student groups or other groups that help them discuss and find peers to find support from. And as people with disabilities, we can I think, no matter if we have experience with this specifically, like we all know the importance of being able to connect with peers, with peer mentors, with people who have a similar experience to us. And that is essentially and getting extra time and getting accessible bathrooms. And that is essentially what 504 was doing. And it's unfortunate that that is at risk of being stripped away simply because of ideological disagreement. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. They argue that that Section 504 is unconstitutional and that the federal government updated rules are beyond its authority. And what people have to understand is that if they are successful um, in doing this, it could weaken that section and, you know, the parts that ensure accessibility, accommodations, and equity for millions of Americans with disabilities in schools, workplaces, and public services could be at jeopardy. Um, and, a lot of the states, Texas, Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, South Carolina, South Dakota, Utah, and West Virginia are all a part of this dismantling. And it's just sad because we just hear that word a lot, dismantling, breaking down of, safeguards that can affect not just one group of people, but, the general masses. And we need to be careful because we're setting precedences for generations to come and how they're going to be affected by these changes. But as we talk about all this, it just reminds me of just the elected officials um, and some of the positive impacts that we can say that they have allowed. And it makes me think of President Jimmy Carter, who on October 17, 1979, he signed into law the Department of Education Organization Act after the Department of Health and Education and Welfare were split into two and became what we now know as DOED, or Department of Education, and HHS, Health and Human Services. The Department of Education began operating on May 4th, 1980, and it's a cabinet level department and it's appointed by the president, but needing Senate confirmation for administrators, and currently headed by Linda McMahon. So, one of the safeguards is that even though, there's a lot of talk about dismantling and breaking down the Department of Education, it's one thing that people can be laid off, but the whole department breaking down has to go through Congress. Um, and we just want to note that while whatever party is in place, the real purpose in talking about all of this, as we reiterate this, is the fact that education is important and access to it needs to be available to all people, regardless of who you are.
Yeah, I mean, it also speaks to the fact that all those hard-won rights and programs that people with disabilities have been able to achieve here in the United States, they help so many people. They help all of us. And so if you're not part of any particular group that's benefiting, but that is because some people don't like them or don't understand or don't agree, they're going to get rid of the system that supports them. That supports you. That supports all of us, and especially the disabled community. So these are not issues that we can ignore, but we really need to lean into and find solidarity to support and preserve the infrastructure that allows us to live and learn and thrive. Um,
Political Jenga.
what?
It's like playing political Jenga. Like
Oh
you
God,
push out one block and it just collapses the whole.
that's right. Just don't be on my, if it's a block below you, it's still going to make you fall down.
That's a
Um,
fact.
so, you know, the Department of Education has undoubtedly played a tremendous part in molding the way educators teach, bringing issues to the forefront to promote the reforms that help to facilitate equal access to education. Sadly, as we've alluded to, there's a strong push to dismantle the department, with the current administration signing an executive order to cut its workforce in half. Now, the Department of Education is the smallest cabinet agency with over 4,000 employees. Its budget in 2024 was $268 billion compared to $14 billion when it was first created. As of 2025, the Department of Education accounts for 4% of annual spending. With it being so relatively tiny, how much more slashing should be done in the name of waste, fraud, and abuse, we wonder.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm just like, man, it's the smallest department. Like, what other fat can be trimmed in order to make this better? So it got me to wonder, like, all right, so what's like the arguments, right? Like, there's got to be something, because this isn't the first time ago. Years ago, I remember a candidate saying, like, I'm going to get rid of these departments, and one of them happened to be the Department of Education. So as I was researching, And then looking into this, one argument that's put out is that the federal government, they want to send power back to the states, and give them control over what is being taught in schools. But the truth is, the Department of Education doesn't even create curriculums. States are responsible for that. State boards of education and state education agencies set board educational goals and learning standards, which serve as guidelines for local schools. And at the local level, school districts are responsible for developing and implementing their own curricula, often in collaboration with teachers and other stakeholders. So they choose the specific textbooks, materials, and instructional approaches that best meet the needs of the students and align with state standards. School boards play a crucial role in approving curriculum decisions. So, you know, you would think, okay, Department of Education, yeah, they're the ones who are in control of it. No, they enforce other mechanisms, which we'll get into a little bit later. Like, we already spoke about IDEA. We've spoken about even civil rights. They're the ones who help to make sure those things aren't being violated. Um, but the second issue, which this to me really speaks about, like trying to look at problems from the inside and reform them and change maybe the way things are operating, but not necessarily firing a whole bunch of people. So, according to the Government Accountability Office, they said that there was a key finding in a report that they did that concluded that the Department of Education lacks a common system to track and manage potential misuse of funds. So that sounds like they just need a little bit more oversight, and they're not equipped with a universal set of guidelines. Directors also lack the staff and financial expertise to monitor their programs closely and effectively. So if you're lacking staff, add more people. Don't take them away. It makes sense to me.
So, Corey, if these are some reasons behind dismantling it, then what exactly does the Department of Education do, and why should we be concerned about whether it stays in place or not?
Right, that's a good question. So the Department of Education is responsible for providing 121 billion, excuse me, 120 billion dollars for grants, work studies, and loans for like higher education, 18 billion dollars in schools to low that are in low income areas, and 15 billion dollars for students with disabilities, according to a CBS Evening News segment that I watched. So the last number is what drew my attention the most because the Department of Education enforces the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA. This legislation makes sure students with disabilities have access to something called FAPE, as we talked about earlier, that involves around their needs. And then, you come to think about it, John. If you scrabble the lettering around in the acronym IDEA, you know what you get at the end of the day.
I was thinking about this the other day. What do you get, Corey?
You get DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So it's like, okay, the department you want to dismantle is the one that covers children with disabilities and covers fights for discrimination, but it all centers around DEIA, regardless. And that sucks because you're trying to take away from this population and I don't say this with any bias because I'm a part of this group, but we have so much to offer. You know, as someone who is as educated as Stephen Hawking, he was a voice to the world when it came down to astronomy and as an astrophysicist and looking beyond what we know and understand about the universe. And I would think that people like him can probably contribute to why we have a space force now, so that we can look to see how our atmosphere changes and what have you. And those things kind of they are influenced by somebody with a disability.
No, it's so true. And I also, this brings to mind also that the U.S. is a great place for higher education, or at least has been. And many people with disabilities come to the U.S. to get access to higher education because of the rights and the freedoms that we have here. And with the different changes in policy and attitudes towards dissent and free speech, or reduction of of these programs, people are not going to want to come to the U.S. to study anymore. That's going to impact the quality of our education. That's going to impact the quality of the professors. We're no longer going to be getting the best and the brightest students. We're no longer going to be getting the best and the brightest professors. And you know, if Stephen Hawking happened to have the wrong opinions, he would have just gotten kicked out, or I don't know. Anyway, this is bad news for all of us. Getting rid of education benefits means discrimination and violations of civil rights, especially with when any administration targets DEIA programs. We must consider protections against students in this area because bullying is prevalent in our school systems, and you have to wonder what a child can use to combat these issues. Fortunately, the IDEA requires schools to act if bullying interferes with a child's free, appropriate public education, as an example. And overall, the Department of Education is in charge of, as Corey said, enforcing these laws, and they bring lawsuits against schools and parties that violate them. So without that unique role being in place somewhere, students with disabilities, we're expensive. We can just become a line item on a school board budget that maybe is put by the wayside. So this is an issue. Discrimination closes the door to the potential that children and other students can achieve, which leads to feelings of degraded self-worth. Our community and many other groups are tired of feeling like we don't matter and that we are not part of making society more inclusive and accessible. I can only imagine what parents of children with special needs and parents whose children are in low-income school district might be feeling and thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I think about, not funding, programs for low income school districts and what have you. Just like, recently, my son just had a fundraiser for his school, right? So that they can have the activities continue to go. And, without any kind of backing or support or even like the threats that come up. Briefly I read like an article where it's like if there's any school promoting any kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, that their funding could be in jeopardy. Um, and I don't know if students fully understand the effects of what's really going on and psychologically what it can do to them. At one point, we were paying for our kids' lunch, and then all of a sudden they stopped it, and all kids had free lunch. I think that's so helpful because, what I tell my children all the time is that the kid next to you, you don't know what they're experiencing at home. You don't know if they're not eating. You don't know if this is the only meal that they're going to receive during the course of the day, right? And, I don't know if this student happened to, be experiencing something, but it made me think about this. So I attended my oldest son's school when he was in second grade, and it was part of this program called Dads of Great Students or Dogs. And all the fathers, will volunteer at different times. They'd go to the elementary school, they'd walk the building, make sure it was safe, which broadens the community. And I enjoyed it, and I wanted to do it for both of my kids, but COVID came up, so my youngest didn't get a chance to have me participate in it. But one of my duties happened to be during lunch, and if you got children out there, you know that your kid does not eat lunch all the time. They think the food is gross. Or even if you pack them a lunch, they're like, I don't want this sandwich. I really wanted the food that's provided by the cafeteria, but maybe you just couldn't afford to pay for it. And there's this one kid, he ate all of his food and it happened to be broccoli, and he just drank the juice. even from the broccoli. And I admired it for one, because I'm just like, man, he's being taught right. Make sure you eat your veggies at school. But then it hit me. That might be his only meal. And maybe he's eating everything because he's just starving and he's hungry. And so, it got me a little bit sad because I know my kids can come home and they can eat and they don't worry about anything. But there are so many little ones in that cafeteria that are probably suffering and benefiting from free or reduced lunch that the federal government helps to sponsor.
Hmm. No, that's so important. And again, that's a reminder of the programs that are in place uh, that are so often regarded as, oh, these are benefiting people who are lazy, or these are benefiting people who are mooching off of the system, or these are benefiting the children of illegal immigrants, or what have you. Um, they benefit all of us,
Yeah,
and these are things that we do not need to be fighting over. These are things that we can afford to have for all of us. Like, this is not what is breaking the budget. This is not about what's breaking the bank of any country. Um, there's a lot of other things. Keep on track of what's happening to tax cuts for the ultra wealthy where you live. Um, there's a lot of revenue to be had that can fund programs that support the most vulnerable, even if we're not part of it, even if we don't understand it. Um, in the end, they support our entire communities. So on that note, uh, education is important. We're going to dive even further into our experience with educational accommodations, which of course lead into employment, and all the other things that the Department of Education provides. We didn't even mention vocational rehab, Corey. Uh, it is also under Department of Education, uh, which helps pay for vehicle adaptations. It helps you
it's
retool
cool.
and get back to work after a disability.
Right.
All number of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to cover because every day there's just something different that you have to say to yourself, okay, am I considering these things? Am I thinking about these things? And because the cycle just changes, there's always something fresh. But what I am looking forward to as we are getting ready to close is I'm looking forward to having the group discussion because I want to know from different people that, we have had as guests on the podcast and they've spoken about, there's a lot of people who got hurt right before they either went to school or while they were in school and that they had to go back to their universities and, they got things changed because of their disability. They made complaints and said like, hey, listen, like I can't get there, this needs to be changed. You need to put a ramp here. And, I know you've spoken about um, having to ask people for assistance when you were attending college, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, without the know-how and without having, things like the ADA and FAPE and IDEA in place, like, where would you be? You're a testament yourself. You know what I mean? You got hurt, you went to school, you persevered through your injury, you even traveled back abroad to help teach people. And I think it leads back to that example, you once were the student learning how to figure out how to transfer and doing all that to going out and helping people, not just in your community, but abroad. And that's the beautiful impact of what opportunities to education can do for people with disabilities. Just because we sit in the chair doesn't mean we want to sit on our behinds all day. We want to contribute to the process of making the world better, one wheel at a time.
One wheel at a time. Beautifully said, Corey. And we'll be tracking how these different benefit programs shift, and if the Department of Education is no more, and next week or in the weeks after, we'll be tracking to see how these programs are implemented, perhaps by other departments. So we'll see. But Thank you, Corey, for a great discussion. Stay tuned, everyone, and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next and how you can participate. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel to watch each podcast and click that notification bell so you are alerted when new episodes drop. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking or Super Adaptables.
Indeed. So until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
Keep adapting.